You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let's take a look at our top stories in this edition. And the date is set. Kenya's do-over election will take place on October 17th. Uhuru, Kenyatta and Raila Odinga will go head-to-head once more. But the Electoral Commission will remain the same, despite calls from Odinga's camp to change its members. Reports of crimes against humanity in Burundi. A UN report calls on the International Criminal Court to open an investigation and blames the government of creating a climate of fear. Claims the president's spokesperson predicted, quote, would have no effect. And in English-speaking parts of Cameroon, teachers began the school year with almost empty classrooms after activists called on parents to boycott. It's part of the ongoing protest for equal rights in the Francophone majority country. Giving it another go, Kenya will hold a new presidential vote on October 17th following Friday's Supreme Court decision to annul last month's election result. Incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta and his longtime rival Raila Odinga will go head-to-head once again, but the Electoral Board will not be replaced before the poll, as Odinga had requested. Nicolas Germain has the story.
It's the next sticking point in Kenya's electoral process. On Monday, the government said the election board will not be replaced, despite the fact the Supreme Court overturned the result of the poll, citing irregularities. But on Sunday, Kenya's opposition leader, Raila Odinga, had sent out a clear warning.
We have said that you cannot force Kenyans to go to polls that are supervised by thieves. That we cannot accept.
The new campaign is already tense. The incumbent, Uhuru Kenyatta, accepted the court's ruling, but he also called some of the Supreme Court judges crooks and made the following threatening comments.
Tunafanya kazi hii, unakuja una block, unaweka injunction. Kwani unafikiria wewe umechaguliwa na nani? No, there's a problem and we must fix it. Going forward, we must fix it.
Experts said it was the first time in Africa that a Supreme Court had cancelled the presidential election result following a complaint made by the opposition. It was an embarrassment for international observers and some local election observers who had generally praised the poll as free and fair.
Allegations of crimes against humanity in Burundi. According to a report published this Monday by UN investigators, a climate of fear reigns in the Central African country, with violations that include executions, torture, and sexual violence. According to UN and NGO sources, between 500 and 2,000 people have been killed since April 2015, and more than 400,000 others have fled, including dozens of opposition activists. President Pierre Nkurunziza's spokesperson fired back at the report, accusing the investigators of being, quote, mercenaries in a Western plot. Ellen Gainsford has more on the UN report.
After interviewing more than 500 witnesses, UN investigators describe a climate of fear in Burundi. They've uncovered widespread human rights abuses that they say constitute crimes against humanity.
These crimes include arbitrary detentions, acts of torture, and other inhuman and degrading acts. Extrajudicial executions, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, and enforced disappearances.
Unrest broke out in Burundi back in 2015, when President Pierre Nkurunziza sought a third term in office, sparking protests and creating a political crisis. More than 400,000 people have fled the country, and hundreds have been killed. The report is a culmination of a year-long inquiry, including accounts from victims and their families. During this period, Burundi's government has refused any cooperation or dialogue with the Commission. Following the release of its findings, the UN is calling on the ICC to launch an investigation as soon as possible, blaming the highest level of the state. But they're running out of time. Burundi is in the process of withdrawing from the court.
A well-known opposition figure in Rwanda is behind bars. This Monday, Rwanda's government announced Diane Shima Rwigara had been arrested, along with her mother and sister. They are accused of tax evasion, and Rwigara is accused of using fake documents to gather signatures for her presidential candidacy. The 35-year-old accountant by trade tried to stand against Paul Kagame in the presidential election last month, but was barred from doing so. Kagame was credited with 98.8% of the vote. A dirty war. That's how South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa called the raging scandal surrounding his personal life. According to the Sunday Independent, emails show the unionist-turned-business icon has links to at least 8 women with whom he is believed to have extramarital affairs. Ramaphosa denies the claims. He and his wife told reporters they financially support more than 50 men and women every month. Ramaphosa is currently the deputy president of the ANC, South Africa's ruling party. He says the accusations are aimed at discrediting him months before he's set to run for president of the party in December. And a back-to-school boycott in Cameroon. Activists in the 2 Anglophone regions of the country called on parents not to send their kids to school this Monday, a call largely followed by families nervous following months of unrest. Just last week, dozens of activists were released from jail, though others remain there. They were arrested after protests demanding equal treatment with the Francophone majority. Our team on the ground brings you this report.
You will read these numbers.
A math lesson with just 1 student. The start of the academic year is off to a bad start at this school in Fundong, 60 kilometers from Bamenda, the city at the centre of the Anglophone crisis these last 11 months. Despite a call by the Cameroonian authorities for classes to resume normally, many parents are too scared to send their children back to school. To the disappointment of this teacher.
I feel discouraged. Last year I had 41. So if I'm having 1 child now, it's not encouraging.
Yes? Only 5 of the 234 students in this school showed up today, following a call by radical Anglophone activists to boycott the start of the academic year. A climate of fear only made worse in recent weeks by a series of arson attacks on schools, deemed terrorist acts by the Cameroonian government. This head teacher's office went up in smoke weeks before the start of term.
The whole archives of the school was destroyed. Some parents have not sent their children to school today because they are still frightened. They don't know what can happen to their children because of this incident that took place here.
Despite the release of the main leaders of the Anglophone crisis last week, protests continue. General strikes are now 3 days long and are widely followed. This journalist is one of 55 people released and has just returned to his family after 7 months' detention.
You miss me?
But he still supports the cause. He's demanding the release of all Anglophone activists in exchange for calm.
The people are bent that if everybody is not released, ghost towns will not stop. Even schools are not going. We need peace so that the others should come back and let schools resume. That is our main cry.
Given the small number of students in class this Monday, it could be another difficult school year for the Anglophone regions of Cameroon.
And there are reports of protests about 50 kilometers outside of Bamenda, the capital of one of Cameroon's 2 Anglophone regions. A 14-year-old is believed to have been killed in clashes with police on Monday morning. Another team bites the dust in the qualifiers for the 2018 World Cup in Russia. Nigeria and Cameroon tied at 1-1, but it wasn't enough to keep Cameroon in the running. Sports editor Kitivan Gorjestani is on set to tell us more and to put it all in perspective.
Yes, it's the end of the road for Cameroon in these qualifiers. They had that goal tying the game. They needed a win in order to stay in the running in these qualifiers. That didn't happen. The draw for Nigeria means that they're not exactly qualified, but they move 1 step closer to a ticket for Russia. Nigeria now unbeaten in that Group B. They're leaders with 10 points. For Cameroon, it means that they now trail Nigeria by 7 points with 2 games left, 3 points for a win. That's a 6 points maximum. They will never catch up, and only the first one in each of the African groups makes it to Russia. Group B, of course, living up to its billing of the group of death: Nigeria, Zambia, Cameroon, Algeria. It was really a tough draw for these Cameroonians, as it turned out in a surprising way, because Nigeria had not qualified for the Africa Cup of Nations earlier this year. They are now top of this group and on their way to the World Cup. Cameroon, on the other hand, they were crowned the African champions back in Gabon earlier this year. So everybody was expecting them to perform. And Algeria, too, everyone expected them to perform. They're at the bottom of this group, and they were in the World Cup in Brazil in 2014. They made it to the last 16. They really performed well. So it's a bit of a surprise by the Nigerians. The Super Eagles are back into their winning ways. They're looking for a 6th qualifier into the World Cup, a 6th trip to the World Cup for the Super Eagles, and goodbye to the indomitable Lions, who were not really there.
Yeah, and who have won several titles in the past, at least in the African Cup of Nations. So thank you so much, Kitivan Gorjasani, for that context and perspective. That's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. There's more news coming up on France 24. Do stay with us.